A mother's love turned deadly in Duxbury when postpartum psychosis claimed 4 victims, 3 children, and a family's perfect life. The Clancy family seemed like the picture of perfection. In the peaceful town of Duxbury, Massachusetts, their home stood proudly, framed by a white picket fence and filled with the sound of children's laughter. Lindsay, a dedicated mother and a compassionate labor nurse, radiated warmth and kindness. It was as if she was born to care for others. Patrick, her husband, was a quiet, steady presence, a man whose love for his family was evident in every gesture. Their 3 children, Cora, Dawson, and baby Callan, were the light of their lives, bright-eyed, curious, and full of joy. Together, they appeared to embody a life many would envy. But perfection can be fragile. Behind Lindsay's radiant smile and the children's innocent laughter, something darker was taking root. Lindsay loved her children deeply, but the unrelenting weight of anxiety and exhaustion began to creep into her life after Dawson's birth. Her days were a mix of joy and chaos, but her nights became battles fought silently in the confines of her own mind. When Callan was born, it seemed like a fresh start, a chance to embrace the happiness she so desperately wanted. Yet the shadows in her mind refused to loosen their grip. Patrick, unaware of the storm gathering inside his wife, believed his love could protect them from anything. He poured his energy into his family, finding happiness in the little moments, snowball fights with the kids, watching Lindsay cradle Callan, and whispering, "I love you," as they drifted to sleep. But he didn't see how Lindsay's laughter had softened, how her gaze had become distant. He missed the subtle signs of the cracks forming beneath the surface. As weeks turned into months, Lindsay's struggle deepened. She sought help, clinging to the hope that she could reclaim the life she once had. Therapy sessions and endless medications filled her days, while late-night conversations with Patrick revealed the depths of her fears. Yet the world around her offered no reprieve. The looming return to work after maternity leave felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She smiled for her children, laughed at their jokes, and took photos to capture their joy. But behind that smile, she was quietly unraveling. January 24th, 2023, began like any other. A blanket of snow covered the yard as the children's laughter filled the crisp air. They tossed snowballs and built snowmen, their cheeks flushed with the cold. Lindsay stood nearby, phone in hand, capturing the moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she snapped the photos. She sent them to Patrick, who smiled at the images, unaware of the turmoil hidden behind her serene expression. To him, they were simple snapshots of a beautiful day. But for Lindsay, they were something more, a desperate attempt to hold on to a fleeting sense of normalcy. Inside the house, however, Lindsay's thoughts had taken a darker turn. A plan was forming in the quiet spaces of her mind, a plan that would soon unravel the illusion of their perfect life forever. The air in the Clancy home was heavy, almost suffocating, as the day unfolded. Patrick was in the basement, focused on work, while Lindsay stayed upstairs with the children. It seemed like an ordinary day on the surface. The kids had just returned from a doctor's visit, and the snow outside provided a perfect backdrop for their afternoon play. Yet beneath the surface, something in Lindsay had shifted. Her mind was far from the laughter of her children, locked in a place of quiet and deadly resolve. As the children played, Lindsay sat with her phone, her fingers moving with eerie precision. A quick Google search for kids Miralax. A calculation on Apple Maps to check the time to a restaurant in Kingston. A call to the local CVS. These actions appeared mundane, routine, even thoughtful. But behind each one, something far darker was at work. At 5:15 p.m., Lindsay texted Patrick from upstairs. "Any chance you want to do takeout from the 3V? I didn't cook anything. It's been a long day." Her tone was casual, apologetic. Just a tired mother asking for a break. Patrick, eager to help, agreed without hesitation. He chose scallop risotto, while Lindsay picked a Mediterranean bowl. It was a small, normal moment between a couple who often leaned on each other. Patrick couldn't have known that this simple errand would take him away long enough for Lindsay to carry out a plan that would shatter their lives. Before he left, Lindsay sent another text, reminding him to pick up medication for the kids at CVS. She placed the food order and kissed him goodbye, her movements calm and deliberate. As Patrick walked out the door, he had no idea of the horrors that were about to unfold within their home. As soon as the front door closed, silence crept in, wrapping itself around the house. The children, Cora, Dawson, and baby Callan, were still inside, their voices faintly echoing from another room. Lindsay moved with chilling purpose, her mind clouded by anguish and something far darker. What followed defied comprehension. The woman who had once sung lullabies to her children now used exercise bands, tools meant for strength and health, to commit an act of unthinkable violence. One by one, the laughter of her children was silenced. First Cora, then Dawson, and finally Callan. The basement, once a place of giggles and toys, became a graveyard of innocence. At 6 p.m., Patrick returned home. Snow glistened under the streetlights as he carried the takeout bags inside, but something felt wrong. The usual hum of life in the house was missing. No children laughing, no Lindsay greeting him at the door. The silence felt suffocating. He called out, his voice uneasy. "Lindsay? Kids?" No answer. Panic gripped him as he began to search the house. Upstairs, he found the master bedroom door locked, something Lindsay had never done before. His heart pounded as he pounded on the door, shouting her name. When there was no response, he forced it open. What he saw stopped him cold. Blood streaked the floor and the windowsill, and a knife rested on the bedside table, its blade dull in the dim light. Patrick's eyes darted to the window, and his stomach dropped when he saw Lindsay lying outside in the snow. He bolted to the backyard, dialing 911 with shaking hands. Lindsay's body was twisted and broken from the fall, but she was still alive. Her voice was faint and detached as Patrick's voice broke. "What have you done?" he asked, trembling. Her reply, cold and distant, sent a shiver through him. "I tried to end it. The kids are in the basement." At first, her words didn't register, but when they did, Patrick ran back inside, his legs moving faster than they ever had before. He rushed down the basement stairs, calling out desperately, "Guys, where are you?" The silence was deafening. When he reached the bottom, the scene that awaited him would haunt him for the rest of his life. His 3 children lay lifeless on the cold floor, exercise bands wrapped tightly around their necks. Patrick let out a scream that shook the walls, a cry of pure anguish and despair. He knelt beside them, begging, pleading for them to wake up. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking, "please come back." When the police arrived moments later, Patrick's voice broke again, this time in a trembling, hollow tone. "She killed the kids." The words hung in the air, a devastating truth he could barely bring himself to say. The basement was a scene of unimaginable sorrow. Patrick's anguished screams echoed through the cold, empty space as he cradled the lifeless bodies of Cora and Dawson. Their once bright and mischievous faces were now pale and still, robbed of the laughter that had filled their home. Baby Callan, only 7 months old, clung weakly to life, his breaths shallow and labored. The paramedics arrived quickly, but the room was heavy with desperation. Patrick's pleas were frantic, his voice cracking as he begged them over and over, "Please, save them! Please, don't let them die!" But it was already too late. Cora and Dawson were pronounced dead at the scene, their young lives extinguished in an instant of senseless tragedy. Callan, the smallest and most fragile, was rushed to the hospital, his tiny body fighting for survival. Patrick followed, every second stretching unbearably as his world fell apart around him. Nothing made sense. His grief was a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. The woman he had loved, trusted, and shared his life with had become the source of his greatest agony. Lindsay was taken to the hospital as well, her body broken from the fall but still alive. Patrick couldn't bring himself to look at her. How could he? The woman lying on the stretcher was a stranger to him now. His mind flashed to memories of the life they had built together. Snowy afternoons playing in the yard, bedtime stories whispered under the covers, and long conversations about their dreams for the future. Those memories now felt like cruel, taunting echoes of a life that had been stolen from him. At the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to save Callan. Patrick stayed close, his heart breaking with every labored breath his son took. But the damage was too severe. In his final moments, Patrick held Callan in his arms, whispering through his tears, "I'm so sorry, buddy. Daddy's here. I love you." Then, silence. The room went still, and Patrick's heart shattered into pieces. His last child was gone. The days that followed were a blur of pain and numbness. Patrick wandered through his children's empty bedrooms, unable to bring himself to touch their toys, their tiny clothes, or the photos on the walls. Every object was a painful reminder of the lives they had lived and the joy they had brought him. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. The silence in the house was unbearable, pressing down on him until it felt like he couldn't breathe. As news of the tragedy spread, the world reacted with a mix of shock and division. Some expressed sympathy for Lindsay, blaming postpartum psychosis, a condition few truly understood. Others condemned her without hesitation, labeling her a monster who didn't deserve compassion. Patrick found himself caught in the middle, torn between his own emotions and the conflicting narratives swirling around him. He hated her for what she had done, for taking away their children. Yet, he couldn't entirely extinguish the love he still felt for the woman she had been before the darkness consumed her. When Patrick finally broke his silence, his words were heavy with pain and a fragile thread of understanding. "I want to hate her," he admitted, his voice trembling. "But I also know she was sick. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the mother of my children. She loved them. She loved me. And now I'm left to pick up the pieces of a life that will never be whole again." The legal and public fallout was swift and unrelenting. News of the tragedy rippled across the nation, leaving shock and disbelief in its wake. Headlines screamed accusations of a mother who had killed her 3 children, and Lindsay's name became synonymous with horror. Television broadcasts dissected every grim detail, while social media erupted in a storm of outrage. Strangers who had never met the Clancys unleashed a torrent of condemnation, branding Lindsay a monster and a murderer, unworthy of sympathy. Yet, there were voices, quieter but steady, who called for understanding, arguing that she was a victim of an all-consuming mental illness, postpartum psychosis, a condition so misunderstood it left most people grappling to comprehend its depths. At the heart of this storm was Patrick, the grieving father and husband, bearing the weight of unimaginable loss alongside the world's fury. Reporters camped outside his home, their cameras waiting to capture every moment of his suffering. Neighbors and friends dropped off casseroles and bouquets of flowers, small gestures meant to console, but incapable of lifting the suffocating burden crushing his chest. A GoFundMe campaign created by a close friend to cover the children's funeral expenses and support Patrick financially became another source of controversy. Though donations poured in, some accused him of using the money to fund Lindsay's legal defense. The campaign raised over $1 million, but the backlash online was bitter and unrelenting. Patrick, caught in the eye of this relentless storm, remained silent. He focused instead on saying goodbye to his children. The funerals were heartbreakingly intimate. 3 small caskets surrounded by photos of smiling faces, beloved toys, and soft flowers. Patrick stood before the mourners, his voice breaking as he spoke of his children. He described Cora's love for painting and her dream of becoming a doctor, Dawson's unstoppable energy and infectious laughter, and Callan's gentle, radiant spirit that seemed to bring light into every room. The congregation wept openly, but Patrick didn't cry. He couldn't. His tears had long since run dry. Meanwhile, Lindsay lay in a hospital bed, her body broken from her suicide attempt. She was a hollow shell of the vibrant woman she had once been, her face blank, her eyes empty. When detectives questioned her, her responses were eerily detached. She admitted to the killings with an unsettling calmness, recounting her actions as though describing a routine chore. Her defense team argued that she had been in the grip of postpartum psychosis, a rare and severe mental illness that warps reality, often leading to delusions and violent impulses. They pointed to her medication history, noting that she had been prescribed over a dozen different drugs in just a few months, a combination they argued had worsened her mental state. The prosecution rejected this explanation entirely. They portrayed Lindsay as a cold and calculated murderer. They pointed to damning evidence: her internet searches about how to harm her children, journal entries that revealed simmering resentment, and her deliberate timing of the murders when Patrick was out of the house. To them, this wasn't a mother driven mad by illness. It was premeditation. The courtroom was stifling, heavy with grief and tension. As the prosecution recounted the horrific details of the crime, the air seemed to thicken, suffocating everyone in the room. Patrick sat in the gallery, his face etched with pain, enduring every word. When the defense presented their case, medical experts delved into the harrowing reality of postpartum psychosis, explaining how it could consume a mother's mind and twist her actions into something unrecognizable. Outside, the public was unforgiving. The idea of a mother driven to madness was not enough for many. They demanded justice, retribution, a punishment that fit the unimaginable crime. For them, no explanation, no mental illness could justify Lindsay's actions. They wanted her to pay. Patrick, torn between his love for the woman he had married and the unimaginable betrayal he had endured, wrestled with his own feelings. In a rare moment of public candor, he shared, "I don't know how to move forward. I don't know if I can ever forgive her for what she did. But I know this. What happened wasn't her. It wasn't the woman I married. She was sick, and no one saw it until it was too late." Lindsay's psychological evaluation became a critical part of her defense, and what it revealed was both haunting and heartbreaking. Forensic psychiatrists described postpartum psychosis as a rare but devastating condition, a sickness that distorts a mother's reality, leaving her vulnerable to paranoia, delusions, and even violent impulses. Lindsay's medical records painted a picture of desperation, relentless anxiety, crushing guilt, and intrusive thoughts that had haunted her for months. The defense emphasized Lindsay's repeated cries for help in the weeks before the tragedy. Her New Year's Day confession to Patrick, that she'd had thoughts of harming herself and the children, was a red flag that should have been impossible to ignore. But despite a brief hospital stay, Lindsay was discharged with reassurances that she posed no danger. Meanwhile, her dependence on medication escalated, with 13 prescriptions over 4 months. Experts argued that this overmedication dulled her clarity and pushed her deeper into despair, possibly fueling the unthinkable. The prosecution saw it differently. They dismissed the idea that Lindsay's actions were driven by mental illness and instead argued they were calculated and deliberate. Chilling evidence supported their claim. Internet searches about killing methods, diary entries filled with resentment, and her calm, methodical behavior on the day of the murders. To prosecutors, this was not a woman overwhelmed by sickness, but one who had planned and executed an unthinkable betrayal of motherhood. The courtroom became a battleground between these two narratives. On one side was Lindsay, a woman overtaken by a monstrous illness. On the other, she was painted as a cold-blooded killer. Every revelation sent shockwaves through those present, and the tension was almost unbearable. Patrick, sitting quietly through every hearing, became the focus of public attention. To some, he was a hero, a grieving father who still managed to show compassion for his wife. To others, his forgiveness was impossible to understand. How could he defend the person who had taken everything from him? His pain, though silent, was evident in every expression, his every movement. A pivotal moment in the trial came with the discovery of Lindsay's diary. One entry, written just months before the tragedy, read, "I feel like I've failed them. I love them, but I feel like they're better off without me. I'm drowning, and I can't pull myself out." The rawness of her words exposed the depths of her suffering. Yet, darker entries revealed resentment toward Cora and Dawson, frustration over how they disrupted her bond with Callan. These conflicting emotions, love, guilt, and bitterness, became the focal point of the case. Outside the courtroom, the public was deeply divided. Mental health advocates called for more understanding of postpartum psychosis and better support for mothers. Others, however, demanded harsh punishment, arguing that no illness could excuse such horrific actions. Social media buzzed with both outrage and grief, turning Lindsay's case into a lightning rod for debate. Amid the chaos, a harsh truth emerged. This tragedy had laid bare the failures of a system meant to protect both mothers and their children. It highlighted the gaps in mental health care, the overwhelming pressures of motherhood, and the silence so many women face when they need help the most. Lindsay's case became more than a trial. It became a catalyst for reflection, a moment that forced society to confront the price of neglecting those who suffer in silence. Patrick Clancy was a man trapped in the heavy silence of his grief. The warmth that once filled his home, the sound of children laughing and running through the halls, was now an unbearable echo. Their toys sat untouched, their rooms preserved as if time had stood still. Every corner of the house told a story, a bedtime routine, a messy art project, a dinner table full of giggles. These memories, once his greatest joy, now cut through him like shards of glass. In the days following the tragedy, Patrick rarely spoke. When he did, his words were filled with the raw pain of a man who had lost everything. "I don't know how to hate her," he confided to a friend, his voice heavy with disbelief. "But I can't understand why she did this. She was my partner, my best friend. And now I have nothing." Publicly, Patrick wrestled with his emotions. On the GoFundMe page set up in the wake of the tragedy, his words reflected a man trying to make sense of the unimaginable. He wrote of forgiveness for Lindsay, attributing her actions to the illness that had consumed her. But his sorrow seeped through every line. "The pain is relentless," he admitted. "I wake up every day to a reality no father should ever have to endure." Even in the depths of his grief, Patrick refused to let his children's memories fade. He turned to running as a way to cope, finding some small comfort in the steady rhythm of his footsteps pounding the pavement. In April 2024, he ran the Boston Marathon in honor of his children, Cora, Dawson, and Callan, raising funds for Boston Children's Hospital. Crossing the finish line, tears streamed down his face. The crowd cheered, but Patrick's thoughts were far away, on the lives he had lost and the hope that their story might save others from the same fate. While the trial unfolded and the world watched, mental health organizations used the tragedy as a rallying cry. Advocates called for better awareness of postpartum disorders, early intervention, and a health care system that treated mothers' emotional well-being with as much urgency as their physical health. Lindsay's case became a symbol of the cracks in the system, but it also exposed the harsh stigma and judgment that often leave struggling mothers in silence. Patrick, though surrounded by support, faced his grief alone. Friends and family offered kindness, but nothing could fill the emptiness. Nights were the hardest. He would sit in the dark, staring at photos of his children, replaying their laughter in his mind, as if willing them back to life. Beneath his heartbreak simmered a complicated mix of emotions. He felt anger toward Lindsay, but also a love for the woman she had once been. It was a painful paradox, one that haunted him every day. As the trial drew to a close, Patrick found himself standing at a crossroads. The world seemed to demand a decision. Would he condemn Lindsay as a monster, or forgive her as a victim of her illness? But Patrick's grief wasn't so simple. His love, his loss, his pain, they defied easy answers. For him, there were no absolutes. There was only the long, messy road ahead, a journey filled with unanswered questions and a love that could never be fully extinguished. Day on the table, Dawson's beloved stuffed animal stayed on his bed, and Callan's crib stood untouched in the nursery. The echoes of their laughter surrounded Patrick, offering him both comfort and pain. as he navigated his solitude. Beyond the walls of his empty home, Patrick reluctantly stepped into a new role. He became a quiet advocate for change, speaking carefully but powerfully about the importance of mental health awareness, especially for mothers. At a fundraiser for postpartum mental health organizations, Patrick stood before a silent crowd and shared his truth. Lindsay wasn't a monster, he said, his voice breaking under the weight of his words. She was a mother who loved her children more than anything, but she was sick, and no one saw it in time. I don't want anyone else to go through what I have. The room hung on his every word, the depth of his pain cutting through the air like a knife. His message resonated deeply, sparking conversations and action. The tragedy of the Clancy family became a rallying cry for better health care, greater understanding of mental illness, and more resources for struggling parents. Yet for Patrick, these efforts were bittersweet. Every step forward in raising awareness reminded him of what he had lost, of the lives he could never reclaim. While the world moved on, as it always does, Patrick remained trapped in the limbo of his grief. He spent countless hours at the cemetery, where 3 small graves lay side by side, adorned with flowers and toys left by friends and strangers. Patrick often sat there silently, sometimes talking to his children, sometimes just listening to the rustling wind. Their absence was a weight that never lifted, yet he refused to let their memory fade. Lindsay, confined to her hospital bed, had become a shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. Her paralysis left her completely dependent on others, a cruel irony for someone who had once dedicated her life to caring for others. In rare moments of clarity, she expressed remorse for her actions, though her words were broken and incomplete, as if she herself couldn't fully grasp what she had done. For Patrick, her apologies offered no closure, only a deeper void that he struggled to fill. As the seasons passed, Patrick found glimmers of peace in unexpected places. A sunrise reminded him of Callan's gentle smile. A child's painting brought back memories of Cora's boundless creativity. The sound of children playing echoed Dawson's infectious laughter. These moments, while bittersweet, no longer brought only pain. They carried with them a fragile hope, a belief that, in keeping their memories alive, Patrick could begin to rebuild the pieces of his shattered world. We must take a moment to truly reflect on the heartbreak of this story and what it teaches us about the silent battles so many face. Mental health struggles are often hidden in plain sight, and it's up to us to create a world where seeking help feels like a lifeline, not a weakness. If you or someone you care about is going through a difficult time, please don't face it alone. Talk to someone. Reach out. Be the voice of compassion that can make all the difference. Let's not allow another family to endure such unimaginable pain. By sharing this story and starting a conversation, we can build a future where help is always within reach. Please like, share, and subscribe to help spread this message. Together, we can turn tragedy into hope and ensure no one feels forgotten in their darkest moments.